It's very strange. My phone seems to start recording on its own. Anyway, strange things aside, let's talk about my existentialist novella. I always wanted to write one since I read Nausea by Jean-Paul Sartre. And this one, for a long time, the working title was Finding Happiness. But now finally I had settled on the title Perpetuating Euphoria, brackets, Lamentations on Existence. This book was finally finished in 2023, which was 2 years ago, nearly 3 years ago as I speak to you now. I believe I started it when I was 33, which would have been around 2008, I think so. It actually took 15 years to write. Ridiculous, isn't it? For 100,000 words, but there you go. So I started writing it because I just had to. I had to get the words out. I was going through a lot of phases of experience, phenomenology experiences, and I'd reached a peak of performance in terms of work rate, where I was working. My physical fitness was the best it had ever been because I was doing a lot of long distance running, going to the gym 3 or 4 times, 5 days a week I think, running every other day, doing weights on the alternate days. I'd separated from my wife around the time that I started this book. In fact, I may have started this before I separated. I think I did. A little while after that I spent the working weeks living in a campsite because I was working quite a long way from home, and the petrol cost was killing me, and things weren't going well at home. I just needed some time on my own, some time and space, and back to basics. So I was leaving my tent in Ford in a shirt and trousers, driving to work around the corner. Before that I'd been driving most of the way to to Arundel, Littlehampton, and getting up at 4 in the morning. I've been driving to the gym near Arundel, and parked outside is where I began writing this on my little netbook in the car. So really a lot of it was about me putting my experiences into words with this character. I think it's called Spencer, I may be wrong, because I haven't read it for a long time and I can't remember much about it. And at some stage it became 2 parts. So the first part, I didn't want to leave it being a very negative book, so I wanted a second part which was about discovering happiness again and joy and hope, because I had lost all of that in my life. My father had died, my aunt had died, all these things had gone wrong. Well, not really wrong, in the long run. They were all okay, it was all okay, it's all part of life. The idea of a particular orange was one that I had first had when I was in my early 20s, and it had stayed with me all that time. And it was a period when I was out of work and I was finding it really difficult to find work, and I would procrastinate and distract myself from the job hunt by suddenly developing this overwhelming need to acquire a certain object, and in this case it was an orange. And I had this whole idea, I don't think I ever did this, but I had this whole idea of walking 5 miles to buy an orange. And I was going to write a story about that, with that title. I could talk about this for a very long time, and this may end up being 2 parts. With the YouTube 15-minute limitation on videos. So, what can I say? So the first part is called Dreaming on Death, and a lot of it is about that kind of thing. It's not, what's the word? I'll remember it in a minute. It's not about death, and I wasn't thinking a lot about death or dying, but those are natural questions which you have to resolve to get to a better place in life, I think. If you are a thinker, or if you grow up thinking you don't have the answers and what you've been indoctrinated with, in other words Christianity, is not quite right somehow and never quite fits, then you have to unpick all of that. And part of that is figuring out, is there an afterlife? What do I believe happens when I die? What about conception? Is it important whether it's true and heartfelt love? What's the purpose? Am I trying to perpetuate my own ego and live forever by siring children, or am I wanting to bring a new life into the world because I love the person I'm with and want to give a soul, life, chance? You know, what's the purpose of these things? Really important questions to get to the bottom of. For me, being quite a philosophical thinker, some people probably never think about them, probably don't care about it until they have a memento mori moment. But I did always think about these things. So you find a lot in here about, or a lot in here that comes from my readings of Albert Camus, which I consider to be absurdism, and existentialism, which for me was really mainly Jean-Paul Sartre. Probably read some Immanuel Kant, and some other books by people who tried to translate existentialism into a implementable sort of, not religion but model. Food deprivation, I sort of experimented with that on and off, and I felt like it was a really good way to start to bring back your feelings and emotions and connect with them. So I wasn't doing it dangerously, but occasionally I would sort of dabble in the area to see what effect it had. I suppose I was being a bit of a psychologist, really. A bit like Timothy Leary, but without the drugs. Body elongation and the alien hand. I actually experienced both of those, and those are phenomena which are have been written about in the sort of pseudoscience world of the strange. I think that's where this idea in Alice in Wonderland came from, of eating the cake and getting bigger, or and drinking the potion and getting smaller, or whichever way around it was. And alien hand syndrome is a documented syndrome, and I had experienced that. I actually laid on the bed once and experienced what seemed to me to be souls leaving my body, about a dozen of them, one after the other, a few seconds in between. My hand sort of raised up off the bed, and I didn't feel like I was in control of it. It just felt completely alien to me. So I probably ought to put a trigger warning on this book now that I know what that is all about, and using trauma-informed practice. When I see chapter titles like Methods of Death, Variations on a Theme, I don't think that chapter ever came to full fruition. Its intention was to be a catalogue of methods of committing suicide, which is particularly macabre. But for some reason it was important for me to put that in there. I did struggle for years through my 20s with suicidal feelings, which I finally conquered in my early 30s. They call that suicidal ideation now. I never actually made plans, but I have stood on a bridge a few times. And I know a lot of people now who have also experienced that. It's not uncommon. No doubt some of you watching now will be thinking that you have been there. So I did struggle with my mental health, I think, in this period. And actually ended up suffering from what I now know was burnout. And I inherited some money from my aunt, and I moved to Cambridge. I dropped out of my job at the NHS and I moved to Cambridge and stayed there because I had friends there, Phil and others who I became friends with. And it was a good time. I loved Cambridge, it was great. I'd love to have stayed there really, but I ran out of money and I just had to move. I couldn't afford to stay there anymore. And so yeah, I dropped out up to Cambridge, lived that sort of libertine, bohemian lifestyle, became a oil painter and continued with my poetry. Did that for as long as I could afford to, which wasn't that long actually, I think a year and a half maybe. Not sure if I wrote any of this while I was there. I suspect that I did. I think I did. It wasn't that I was working on this solidly for 10 years. There were massive gaps of a number of years in between here and there. I would write a bit and then do nothing for months, and just when something tweaked my inspiration. Yes, junkets and other instruments, that speaking in metaphor conversation is, that was definitely born out of Cambridge. I was in CB1, I think it was, the cafe, the well-known cafe with Phil. And that conversation was quite real, and just sort of put that into words, I think. Angeling I really like, that was something that captivated me for a while. I went through a phase where I believed that was the most important thing, to be angeling. So yeah, I was going through weird phases. There we go. Other people's houses, bell, book, candle and map. The bell, book and candle is an ethical method, and the most basic type of ethic that you can use, which is that you, if there's a particular scenario, does it ring alarm bells, does it ring a bell? But there may be something quite unethical about it. You consult the book to see whether there are any examples of it, whether it may be unethical. And the candle is in the cold light of day, under a spotlight, in the public eye. How would it appear to people? Would it be frowned upon? Would it be something that was considered morally righteous? Yeah, I'm not sure where the map came from. Okay, I'm going to stop there and move on to a part 2.